Happy Sunday, and welcome to the Sunday Pub. If you don't know what the Sunday Pub is, if this is your first time, it's every Sunday, almost. We'll get to that later. And it's an open invitation for anyone who wants to join on screen to join on screen, or in the chat. If you don't want to be on screen, that's fine. And chatting about books and usually lots of other things as well. I already have someone joining on screen.
Hello.
Probably the most regular pub regular.
Yeah, I'm one of them. Wasn't here last week though. I was talking to Bridger.
That's fine. That's
from
fine.
from the library ladder.
Library, yeah. Exactly.
How are you, Matt?
I'm pretty good. I've been playing a lot of Cyberpunk 2077 the last couple of days. I mean, again, I finished the game pretty much right after it came out, and with the DLC that they brought out, Phantom Liberty, I decided to do another playthrough. Rogue's here. Hi, Rogue. Dan's here. How you doing, Dan? Colton. Numerous pub regulars. 2 hours ago, Thornall said he is here.
Oh, Thornall. He's friendly.
And this is a more current comment from Thornall. What background did I choose? Well, the first time I played, I was a nomad. And then I think I did a playthrough as a street kid. And now I'm doing Corpo. All sorts of people are here. Terry's here. Daco's here. Really good to chat with you yesterday, Daco. For anybody who missed it, which probably a lot of people did because they haven't actually read the book, we did a Fireside Discord discussion because we had a read-along of Lonesome Dove, and that was me and Britton, but also Daco and Tori and Joanna and Joseph. That was it. Yeah,
it was fun.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Also's here. Joe the Burn is here. Sir Joe of Burn.
I'm actually reading the second book of his series right now. I haven't gotten very far because
Streets of Laredo.
I've no. I'm talking about Joe's series.
Okay.
Of Hybrid Helix.
Here you go, Joe. You've got a fan.
Or
should I say another fan? I liked Wistful Ascending quite a lot as well.
Yeah,
but I haven't read beyond them. Joe was nice enough to send me the rest of the series, but I have not gotten to them yet.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten very far because again, I'm at the lake at the moment, so I haven't had a lot of time to like sit down and read.
Sure. But, lakes will do that.
Yeah, no, I'm at 71 pages right now. So apparently, in this book, our main hero fights evil sharks with legs. Thank you. I think
that sounds like a comic book novel, which is pretty much what it is. Thornall says you look like a jock.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, thank you. I guess. I'm on my phone. It's probably why I look different, and also I'm in a different place. So
Max here, Jeroen's here, Francois from Canada is here. Wow. 8-day kayaking trip on Haida Gwaii. Islands on the west coast of Canada. I've never heard of Haida Gwaii. Weird.
Yeah, Canada.
Okay. I know almost nothing about Canada except that it's cold mostly. Colton says it is the best Lonesome Dove discussion on BookTube. I doubt that, but thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, we certainly had a good time, and it was a really interesting book to read.
Yeah, there was even some stuff I forgot to ask that we talked about in the chat afterwards, so that was fun.
Oh, in on the Discord.
Yeah, on Discord, not on. I
was Cole really in love with Maggie? Yeah. Good question, actually, because it's never really too clearly or explicitly stated in the book. And Call is a complicated man when it comes to emotions.
Yeah, he had some harsh words for our friend Cole.
Yeah. Francois just finished Long Price Quartet. That is meant to be an awesome feeling. I have read the first one.
I've read any.
For some reason, didn't continue. But I intend to. It wasn't a DNF. I liked the first one a lot, but it was just I don't know, life intervened or something. Raph is also here.
Oh,
Hello.
you get your computer situation fixed? Round?
Yeah, that's the question. Can you guys hear and see me?
Otherwise, he wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be looking at and listening to him.
I can hear and see you, Raph. Can you hear us?
I can hear and see you guys as well. Well, I mean, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I probably
not being able to see us is not a computer problem.
Yeah.
Well, I remember he put up a community post where he was like, "Hey, my computer screwed up," and I was like, "Dang it! Now we're gonna have to wait."
Yeah, like the thing is, like the hard drive broke. It was like a 4-year-old computer. It was refurbished when I bought it, and the hard drive just gave up, and the screen was already broken, which doesn't bother me that much, but makes it definitely more difficult to repair the thing. And yeah. So, but I have a new one since yesterday, and I've been trying to get back into it. So this is like the first live stream test of the new computer.
Seems to be working. You are moving, and we can hear you, so it's doing what it should.
I will go. Cheers.
The first live plop on your new computer.
Yeah.
Also tore through the last 250 pages of Seven Surrenders. Yeah, I need to do that as well. Terra Ignota. I've said it numerous times. Every time also has mentioned Terra Ignota, but I tore through the first 3 books. I just binged them and read all 3 of them in like 4 or 5 weeks, and loved them. And then for some reason, I maybe I was a little full of Terra Ignota, and I switched to something else, and I haven't gone back to it yet to finish it, but I do intend to do that. Oh, cool. Dan's last day before vacation, and
all right.
And then he's off to read on the beach. Excellent. Jerona's enjoying Demon in White. Demon in White is widely, I would say, from what I've heard from people who've read the Sun Eater series, it seems to be pretty much everybody's favorite.
Wait, didn't you read it?
I did.
Well, what do you think of it?
It's also my favorite. I count myself in that group of people. Yeah, no, Demon in White is I think an excellent book in a very good series. Yeah.
I finished my reread of Soldiers Live earlier today, and it made me cry like it always does, because it's so good. And sad in a good way.
Maybe Brian and I need to get in touch with our emotions, because we were talking about this. Like, I have never cried reading a book. I get emotional, I get choked up a little, but I've got some sort of a tear duct blockage or something. I just don't cry at all very often because of anything, but especially not something as simple as reading a book. But
it's all right, Matt. I don't cry much either when I read.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel the emotions. I get choked up and I get moved. But the crying thing, I don't really know why. It's not like I had a father who beat me and told me to be a tough guy or anything. I didn't really have a father around, so I'm not sure where I got it. Well, I mean, my parents were divorced.
It kind of changed for me over the years. Like, I was not able to cry. I did not cry with books for a long, long time. But like over the last couple of years, with like all the stuff that happened and all the things I've gone through, I've become less toxically masculine about crying with books, I guess. Doesn't mean I can start crying like in public or anything of the sort.
I don't even have any kind of attitude about it like that I would call toxically masculine. It just doesn't happen. You know, the jump from I am moved and I am choked up to there's actually water coming out of my eyes is a really big jump for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Joe says he only cries when he edits, but that's because of all the mistakes. Joe, if I had to edit your books, I would also cry. Yeah.
For me, I think like the first time I really, really massively cried was as an adult when I reread The House at Pooh Corner, which is objectively a massively brilliant book, and it has that last chapter, the last chapter when Christopher Robin goes away, and when they have the whole going away party and the whole thing, because all the animals realize that he has to go to school.
I remember the choked up feeling from the first time I read that.
Yeah, when he and Pooh Bear go to that like enchanted place up on the mountain, and they talk about like becoming an adult and having to do all these things, but also always wanting to have that place where you can come back to and always be a small boy playing with his bear. And I'm like, that's so fucking meaningful. I think
it's childhood's end in a very poetic way. Yeah.
And it's something you only realize how hard it hits once you are like sort of an adult and realize that, you know.
Thornall, no, I did not cry for Coltrane, but that's also a spoiler, by the way.
I thought that said Coltrane for a minute. I'm like,
as
well,
Brian
his music
pointed out, he hasn't read that far, so be careful with stuff like that. This will not spoil anything because nobody knows anything about the character until later. I almost cried for Squint. I didn't cry for Coltrane, but I was tempted to cry for Squint. But we'll leave that there. Evie says finishing Soldiers Live. I keep wanting to say Soldiers Live as if it's a band called Soldiers. Soldiers Live made me refuse to read Port of Shadows. That book was a perfect end to the series, and the end of the novel was perfect.
It is. I agree with Evie. It is absolutely perfect in that regard. And I understand, like, I have read Port of Shadows, and I know a lot of like fans of Black Company don't necessarily like it that much and think it's trash. I don't think it's trash. It's also been like, I don't know, 20 years since I last read it, like more like 10 years or whenever it came out.
I didn't get that far when I was reading Black Company back in the day. I think I stopped at Soldiers Live.
The thing is, Port of Shadows is just a collection of short stories or novellas that are set somewhere between the Black Company and Shadows Linger. So it's very much a very jarring shift of tone when you're done with Soldiers Live. So ideally, you just read them sort of when you're still in the early Black Company stuff and don't know anything beyond that, because they're just like, you know, sort of very similar to the sort of like big novellas, big chapters that make up the first Black Company book, because they're all about them being in service to the ladies somewhere in the north and doing stuff. And I think they're good for that.
Thornall says, just to interrupt, Thornall says Coltrane loses his glasses and everyone is sad. That's all that happens, I swear.
I thought that's for Squint.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, that's why it's called Squint, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Coltrane. I thought you guys said Coltrane. I was about to say, well,
you already said that. Yeah, no,
it's very stirring.
It's a character in Malazan. Coltrane.
What a name.
Speaking of Coltrane, Colton asks, can movies, TV, or music make you cry even though books don't? I don't remember the last time I cried.
It's a Wonderful Life made me cry.
Actually, I do remember the last time I cried.
Like
it
was heartwarming way, though. It was like happy tears.
I had an extremely ugly, extremely unexpected kind of betrayal breakup about 3 or 4 years ago. And I had a brief period where I was super emotional, like 2 weeks, where I was super emotional. And I cried often. And that was the first time I think I had cried in, I don't know how many years, like a decade or more. And since then I haven't. So, yeah.
Also, Red Dead 2 made me tear up during the last ride. Like, not at first, but like that freaking last ride, like I teared up, man.
Red Dead Redemption 2 is super emotional for a video
That
game.
was freaking hard, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm snickering now, but that game is tough.
Oh yeah, no, there's a lot of very emotional stuff in there. Yeah. Dan, so it's you and me and Brian. So we should do a buddy read together where we try and find a book that'll make us cry. That would be funny. Or
You should have
actually,
a Stoics book club where you get like the three of you together, and you're called the Stoics, and you read like books to try and get an emotional reaction out of you.
Yeah. Yeah, Dan also says he read Flowers for Algernon this tier.
That's another one that does make a lot of
which is a Freudian slip there, Dan. You said this tier. I know you meant this year. And you had a knot in your throat for the last 50 pages. I haven't read it, but
Flowers for Algernon.
I know the basic story. And yeah, it sounds like, of course, it's pretty emotional.
You know, Flowers for Algernon's like that episode of The Twilight Zone where Burgess Meredith finds all the books to read at last, and then the glasses smashes on the ground. Like, that's just mean. It's just mean. It's just a mean book.
Ida, I bet you I can. If you were making a bet, I know I would win it. I don't care how emotional Kakanas is. It's also the Malazan books that interest me the least, to be honest. I'm sure they're good. I'm not saying they're not good, but just knowing the basic concept, it's one of the parts of Malazan lore that interests me the least. But I can guarantee you, I would not be weeping like a baby. I can't guarantee you I wouldn't be choked up, but unlikely to weep like a baby.
I mean, I've gotten sad at the end of books like Mystic River, Jonathan Strange, and Mr. Nor. Like I feel I get like this pit in my chest where I just feel really sad that it's over, but I don't cry. Like, I'm not much of a crier. There's nothing against crying. Like, crying's fine. I mean, that sounds really weird when I say it like that, but like, it's just I just don't do it very often.
Chadia also says she did not cry reading Kakanas, but she cried in Dust of Dreams. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can understand why. Yeah.
Oh, I have to ask Evie, if Evie's still in the chat. Like, do you agree that all of Black Company is at its core a love story? Because like after that ending, I feel it's important to know that yes, it is at the end of the day a love story. One of the best in fantasy.
Somebody also. Yeah, I don't, and I don't think Brian does either, have anything consciously against crying. It's not like I'm holding myself back. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm not like Woodrow Call, who just like buries everything deeply within.
No, I mean there's absolutely no conscious thought that is limiting it. Rogue says the endings of Red Dead Redemption 2, Last of Us, and God of War Ragnarok got him. Yeah, God of War Ragnarok didn't really hit me, but God of War, like the first one of the remake of God of War, was pretty had some very emotional moments. And Last of Us is hard, and Red Dead Redemption 2 is hard. Yeah, Darko also teared up a few times in Last of Us. Yeah.
Thanks, Stevie. Yes, it's a love story.
Everyone's jumping on the Flowers for Algernon makes me cry wagon. If you want to read a book that will make you cry, read Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. You will cry for literature in general. Yeah, that's possible, I guess. Yeah, that's possible.
I don't know about that. I mean, I've read some terrible things, and they make me angry. They don't make me cry in that same way. But I feel like there's a lot of books that make me sort of like choke up or tear up or whatever, depending on it. It's usually not so much for the characters, but like sort of like for my, like the insight I gain about like myself from like the character's journey. You know, Hence
Yeah,
the
it's
thing
usually
about,
it's usually that something in the story, in the characters, or something is
relates to your
sparking
own life experience. Yes.
a sadness that you already have.
Yeah.
I mean, if that were the
Yeah.
case, Sword of Truth would make me cry because I think that's an affront to fantasy literature. But
I've never read it. I've
Which one?
heard enough about Terry Goodkind that I don't have any desire to read anything by him.
don't. It's a waste of
But
time.
yeah, I've heard
Just
that
don't, man.
It is
enough.
bad, but it's
Yeah.
bad, but it's by far not the worst thing ever. It's just,
No.
I think it gets worse like over time. I've only read the first one, so I don't know what goes on afterwards. The first one is, so I think on a point by point basis, I would say the Sword of Shannara is worse than the Sword of Truth. I mean, Wizard's First Rule, but Terry Brooks brings like an enthusiasm or naivete or whatever to the whole endeavor that makes it more bearable and fun.
And he also never put a huge amount of effort into being an asshole in public whenever he could.
Yeah, of course. The context around Terry Goodkind afterwards is even worse.
Yeah.
But like the first, like even just like book by book, I think
Just the book. Yeah.
the book sort of Shannara is incredibly bad in a lot of ways, just by like how
it's overall, I would say it's poorly written, and it's almost kind of a one-to-one
yes,
Tolkien ripoff.
it is. But like it
which is what was being sold at the time. I'm sure he was asked for a Tolkien ripoff, and he did
definitely
a reasonable job of that. But
and to be clear, like Shannara moves into very different places afterwards with later books. Like even
it's just the first book.
Like a leap.
It's just the first book.
And it does lack the meanness that that Goodkind brings to the whole thing, which may, and this is a hot take of mine, be because he's
you have a hot take, Ralph?
I never have hot takes. It's because he's an Ayn Rand objectivist libertarian to the core, and those people are mean at heart because that's kind of part of the philosophy.
You have to be to think all of that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yes, and that kind of comes through in Wizard's First Rule in a way that it doesn't in sort of Shannara, where everyone is basically hippies still, which is cool.
It just occurred to me, it's totally different subject, and it's probably a subject that will exclude you slightly, Ralph, because it has to do with functioning eyes. It just occurred to me when I was thinking, like you said, sort of Shannara, and I immediately had the Brothers Hildebrandt cover of Sword of Shannara, the cover from the 80s or whenever it came out, in my mind. And maybe just because I'm a very visual person, but like a well done cover that is illustrative or representative, like it shows a scene from the book, it has the characters from the book, and that becomes for me kind of inseparable from the story.
Yeah.
Like whenever I think of the story and I'm imagining scenes and characters, I'm imagining it in the cover artist's style with their kind of lighting and colors that they use and that kind of thing. And the Brothers Hildebrandt have a very, very particular style. They were huge in the 70s and 80s. They did every second book's cover, if it was fantasy or occasionally science fiction. And I'm wondering, like, people in the chat, does that also happen to other people, or am I just weird because I'm so sort of
it certainly
visually
did
oriented?
with like books where I was still able to see the cover. Like Lord of the Rings will forever be like, the first time I read Lord of the Rings was my mother's edition, which is the old German hardcover with those like sort of abstract covers. I don't know if you know those, if you've ever seen those old covers. They had like this like smaller image and the title and everything underneath. And they had like these weird, almost like stained glass style covers. They're weird,
but not the illustrations that Tolkien himself did.
No,
because his illustrations are almost abstract. I mean, they're very, very minimalistic.
No, I've seen those.
Okay.
My mother also had like a collection, collection of Tolkien's artwork, which I also looked through.
Okay.
But no, like the origin, like the old German like hardcover trilogy from edition from the 1970s or 80s, whenever that came out.
Okay.
And they have like a very distinct art style, and those images are very, very much sort of like
imprinted
in my head in a way that is hard to get rid of. I feel like the other one is obviously like, because I'm a German kid. I grew up with a bunch of Karl May novels that I inherited from my dad and my grandfather, and they had like a very distinct cover style for a long time. They have like this like hardcover sort of like, they have like a very distinct style, which is like a hardcover, and you have the title underneath, and you have an artwork, a colored artwork, which is sort of glued on to the front cover.
Okay. All
like
right.
like a very unique, weird style of like general design. So you have like basically the thing that looks more like an old school hardcover that pretends to be leather bound, basically. So it's like all brown, and you have like gold leaf for the gold leaf for the title and everything. But then they had like the cover as like a postcard sized image, color image, glued onto that sort of leather thing, pseudo leather or chestnut leather, and that very specific style has stuck with me forever. It's like
the Lord of the Rings for me is a weird example, because the first one that I got, my mother gave me a box set, which was also the Brothers Hildebrandt, but the layout of the cover was such that it had a really, really huge flat color border and a pretty small image by them, which I've found very, very strange. And when I was a kid, I used to actually go get a magnifying glass so I could look at that picture at some sort of proper size. And that was totally in my head for Lord of the Rings. And over the years, it's become Alan Lee, who is the classic Lord of the Rings illustrator. Like he does, all of his stuff is watercolor, so it has all this very desaturated, ghostly, ethereal kind of feeling, most of his pictures. And that's become like the standard picture in my head. And he was actually a visual consultant on the movies, and even is a visual consultant on Rings of Power, I think.
I remember
so like much the classic.
I remember watching his interviews on like the special editions of the old movies, when he talked about like his art and stuff.
Yeah, and he did. I've got a couple of art books by him, specifically just Middle Earth art books, and he's got a couple of them which are only pencil drawings, which are also just amazing. Like his style is crazy beautiful. Really, really gorgeous. Everyone's asking and telling in the chat what they are reading at the moment. I am reading at the moment Stone of Farewell, the second book in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad the Chad Williams. It's pretty good. I really enjoyed The Dragonbone Chair, which is the first one. This one starts slower, which is weird to say, because
I was going to say, wait.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Yeah, it's hard to. I'll have to explain it a bit more than that. The first one starts with castle life for 200 pages. So the beginning of Dragonbone Chair is slow in that sense. It's not boring, but it's slow.
I wonder if like the beginning of the first Baldur's Gate computer video game was sort of modeled after that, because you start out in that castle and your wizard friend tells you to do something and so forth. It feels very similar to like the beginning.
There are so many things. Reading the Dragonbone Chair, there were so many things where I was like, oh, this is George R.R. Martin did this later. Yeah. And oh, Robin Hobb did this later. And like there are just so many things where I
need to read Tad Williams.
Okay, this is obviously, I mean, I knew that, but I'm just experiencing how influential it was as a series. It wasn't hugely popular or successful with readers, but
it was hugely popular with authors.
With authors, yeah. A lot of authors have said Tad Williams was massively influential on them. Yeah. But what I mean about this one, Stone of Farewell, it feels like what he's doing at the beginning of the book is a check-in with everybody, and everybody is in different places. There are lots and lots of different things going on all over the world, and lots of different sort of stakes and understanding of what's happening and all of that. And he's jumping around, and it's just not hooking me.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I'm pushing through that. I'm sure it will eventually hook me again, but right now.
It has a bit of like a sort of like lumbering start before you are caught up with what happened and stuff. And
Jerome, I can't say if it's as slow as Dragonbone Chair. I found Dragonbone Chair had a slow start, but I didn't find the rest of it that slow. Like once you get past like 100, 150, maybe 200 pages, I felt that it flowed pretty well. One of the things I think that George R. R. Martin does better is having lots of characters who are all in different places and
Yeah.
you're interested in all of them. You know, like sometimes in Song of Ice and Fire, I would think, can we go back to Tyrion? But I wasn't like, there weren't any of the threads that I was just bored with. But there's bits in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn where I'm like, you know, I don't care about this one. You've jumped to some place with some people and I just don't care. I'm not that excited by what's going on. So that felt a little bit slow. I'm only 100 or something pages in so far, Jerome. So I wouldn't be able to give a comparative opinion between Stone of Farewell and Dragonbone Chair. So not quite there yet.
Well,
Yeah.
I am reading. I'm reading three things at the moment. I'm reading the second Hybrid Helix book called Return of the Griffin, which is pretty good, at least so far. Again, I haven't had a lot of time to read it so far because I've been away. I'm reading Moon Witch Spider King finally by Marlon James, which is really quite fascinating.
Just by the title, I knew that was a Marlon James.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of that book before, but when you said Moon Witch Spider King, I was like, it's got to be.
Yeah, it's the second part of like Black Leopard, Red Wolf. Which, you know.
And I'm reading a comic, 100 Bullets. So, because I'm trying to catch up with comics.
100 Bullets is good. Yeah.
The art in it is really
actually.
quite good.
This was a big weekend for comics because my my comic store is on the other side of town. It used to be a 5-minute walk from my flat, and then I moved, and now it's on the other side of town. So when I subscribe to things or I order things, the reason I keep that comic store is it's the only one in Berlin that is only English comics, and they have a huge selection and are really nice guys. And what always happens is I subscribe, I order things, and then I don't go see them for 3 months. You know, so my pull box is just like 2 kilos of comics. And I got the BPRD Omnibus, Volume 1.
Yeah.
The first
I haven't
one.
read that yet, but, you know, I like Mike Mignola.
The 20th anniversary special edition of The Amazing Screw-On Head and Other Curious Objects.
Have you seen the cartoon of that? That is.
I have not. I didn't even know there was a cartoon.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Got the latest edition of Saga.
Mm-hmm.
I got 3 bind-ups of Rat Queens. Does anyone know Rat Queens?
I've heard of it.
Rat Queens is an all-girl D&D party, basically.
Okay.
And there's a dwarf. There's a dwarf fighter, a halfling thief, an elf. I forget how they split up, but it's very funny. It's very lighthearted and cool. And the new Grendel Omnibus. There's a 6th. I don't know if anyone in the world cares about Grendel except me, but I have all of the Omnibuy.
Joe likes Grendel.
Joe, if you like Grendel, did you know that there is a new omnibus which has got new stories in it? I don't think any of the stories are drawn by Mignola, but that's pretty not Mignola, Matt Wagner. That's pretty standard for Grendel because it's one of those like the Hellboy verse, the Mignola verse. It's one of those things where he had an idea and it became so big he opened it up and let lots of other people draw and write.
So like Hellboy?
Exactly, which is what I just said. Yeah. Joe, yeah, it's the same with me. The earlier Grendel, the Hunter Rose story, is my favorite Grendel, of course. But I think that that's kind of the case with everybody. But yeah, the idea with Grendel is there's kind of this demon or spirit that possesses people and makes them very smart and kind of evil. And that's the basics. And then it sort of, all of the stories go through time. So there's a story that's kind of in the 60s or 70s, I think Hunter Roses, or it's set in the 80s or something. And it goes up until like thousands of years from now, like high sci-fi kind of stories and all sorts of things. But it's this Grendel spirit possessing people throughout the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, the Grendel concept without Matt Wagner doing it is lesser than when Matt's doing it. Yeah. Has anybody read Mage by Matt Wagner?
No.
It's the King Arthur story. But in our time, a normal guy discovers that he is a reincarnation of King Arthur. Which
I would have thought it was like a reincarnation of Beowulf or something, or maybe even Grendel.
Different comic.
Oh.
Different comic called Mage. Is by the same guy, invented by the same guy, Matt Wagner, but it's a totally different comic. And there is a reincarnation of Merlin, and then he eventually discovers reincarnations or incarnations of many, many different legendary heroes, like Hercules is in it, and all sorts of different people are in it. It's very, very good. Joe knows it. Yeah. Joe
I have not read that, of course.
No, that was, I mean, yeah, it wasn't. Probably you might have been able to catch it, but it's not the kind of thing you probably would have read at that age.
No, probably not.
Yeah, I started reading it when I was in university.
By Kieran Gillen, which is a King Arthur related comic. I've only read the first volume, but I really liked it.
I think I read the first volume of that as well. Yeah. Also knows Rat Queens. Cool. Daniel knows Rat Queens. Yeah, Rat Queens is a lot of fun.
No, I've heard of Rat Queens. I just don't think it would be of interest for me. It might surprise me though.
I know.
Yeah, it helps if you're a D&D nerd, because it's very clearly playing with and making jokes about D&D tropes. So Thornall is a. I knew that. I think Thornall is a Mignolaverse fan, and is excited by me getting BPRD. Yeah, I think I read. Fitz is yelling at me. I think I've read some of the BPRD digitally, but
they recently reprinted his Foffer and the Green Mouser comics he did with Howard Chaykin. I saw that at my local comic shop. I was thinking of picking it up.
Yeah, I've read like a lot of stuff last week. Obviously, I read The Mercy of Gods, which is okay. I've read The Seventh Whale of Salome by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which was absolutely brilliant, and I highly recommend it to everyone. It's so fucking good. Okay, to be clear, Mercy of Gods will be fun for everyone who loved The Expanse. It is very similar. It has all the same strength. It's just like more space opera. Less hard sci-fi and focused on humans than The Expanse is, but it also has the same issues that I had with The Expanse. So there we go. And I started reading Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings after finishing Soldiers Live earlier today, because I want to read stuff that makes me angry from time to time.
Almost always, in my experience.
No, seriously. Like I was having way too much fun. Obviously, I love reading or rereading, in this case, Black Company, and I had fun with Mercy of Gods, and I absolutely loved Seventh Whale of Salome. Although that obviously also did make me angry from time to time, because you can't write about like Hollywood in the 1950s with a young Mexican actress without touching on stuff that will make me angry. It's just like built in.
I've heard Silvio, like, she sounds interesting. She seems like she's bringing horror back to its kind of pulpy roots, you know?
She, like, this one is not horror, but she has done a lot of horror that I haven't read because this was my first Silvia Moreno Garcia. But she does have like she knows her cinema, is my point. Like the last one, like last year's novel Silver Nitrate. I haven't read it. I know that Ron, who's sometimes in chat, I don't know if he's here today,
Haven't
has
seen
read
him
it,
yet.
which is about like Mexican horror movies of the 1980s or something.
Oh, my friend
so
John loved
she has a very specific like sort of tie to cinema in some ways, and I think that comes through a lot. And I can highly recommend it. So I decided like reading Fearing the Black Body, which is a nonfiction, an academic text on the entanglement of racism, misogyny, classism, and other things into fat phobia, which I feel is something that may be worth reading because I'm pretty sure I can use the insights somewhere down the line.
Sure. This Daniel says something that I've heard numerous times, but I haven't experienced enough myself to really know. He says Daniel Abraham is way better by himself. James S.A. Corey, the two of them are trying to do an entirely different thing than what Abraham does solo, which is interesting. I've only read solo Abraham, and I haven't read any James S.A. Corey.
Heard the Long Price Quartet's pretty good, though. I know we were kind of talking about that earlier.
Exactly.
So,
that's Daniel Abraham.
I won't repeat my point there. This is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no.
Can I just like call out Jeroen's incredibly terrible pun on Joe being disgruntled?
Yeah, no, I
want to acknowledge that level of.
I did little badumtis in my head when I saw
my inner Terry Pratchett fan. It does not allow me to ignore that kind of joke.
Yeah.
There's something special about.
I just didn't want to encourage Jerome, but I guess he doesn't really need any encouragement. He also says James S.A. Corey is quite mid. I'm a huge fan of the TV show, The Expanse. I watched all 6 seasons, I think 3 times now. And at some point I was like, well, this is an adaptation and I should read the books. And I started the first book and it's like 200 pages in. I was not grabbed enough that I was excited about any of it, and I stopped. I put it down.
I think like what I find interesting both with The Expanse, and I've read the entire series, so I'm not just like judging anything. I think they write in an incredibly smooth way. If you want to have like the quintessence of 21st century genre fiction writing that is immediately adaptable to different media, that's what you get from James S.A. Corey. They're incredibly good at that. Right. You read The Expanse and you're like, yeah, I can see this in my head as a TV show, which is obviously became immediately.
Sure.
And they hit all the right notes and they avoid all the things that would make like interesting storytelling for me, which is where stuff gets messy because
where it gets difficult to adapt into
exactly.
television.
So they never quite go there, but they're highly entertaining to read. That's the point.
Right.
It's highly entertaining to read. They do, a lot of like normalized inclusivity. You have like, your queer people in there. You have your people of color in there. They do all of that stuff really well, which I approve. Because, we need to normalize that and not just have like a queer story, but like have a story where just like there are queer characters as well.
Sure.
They do all of that really well. I'm just like I'm a more antagonistic reader. I want like the writer to challenge me, and James S.A. Corey will not challenge me.
Right.
They just don't.
Yeah.
I'm a similar way. I like push. I think that's why we get along so well, Raph. I also like books that might push my buttons a little bit. I mean, I like Lolita a lot. That should tell you.
Hello, Nico.
I like being challenged. Not that I'm, I'm like that stuff. that's bad. That's bad. But seriously, that's a great book.
Nico just turned up. Nico is HT Falag. He's a real life friend, and that is a good point for me to mention for the first time. I'll repeat it later. Next weekend, no pub. because I will be at the Kraken with Nico.
Again, how many Kraken are there by every year now?
The most that there have been in a year is 4, I think.
Okay.
And there was one in April, was the last one I was at.
Yeah, I
and
remember.
There's an August, and there's a small one in December. I think there's 3 this year, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. I leave. It's actually a slightly longer one. So I leave on Wednesday and be back on Tuesday the week after. Almost a full week away, which is cool.
I'm going to be starting school again soon.
Yay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm
also,
Easter, summer, and Christmas, Nico says. Yeah.
Adra, I think like the main issue with the Expanse is that like Miller gets sidelined so early because Miller is so much cooler than Holden.
Yes. Also in the TV show. In the TV show, I was like, I'm here for Miller.
Yeah,
and
when
Miller's gone, he's got the hat, and in the TV show, he's also got the funky haircut, and he's got a very particular way of speaking, and he was just a really, really interesting guy. Holden is one of the most boring main characters in a TV show. I don't know about how boring he is in the books, but he's just like extremely predictable, I think, is the thing that annoyed me about him. I always knew what he was going to do. You know, they'd always set up this big sort of dramatic moral decision kind of moment. And it's like, I know exactly what Holden's going to do. It only becomes interesting if someone else goes around Holden and does something you didn't expect.
First of all, bye, Evie. And yes, I've noticed that you've read these Discworld books, and we need to talk about that at some point. Also,
bye, Evie.
Have a good lunch.
Enjoy lunch. Hello, Mads. Good to see you.
I was going to say, I kind of view. I'll admit, I am speaking from someone who hasn't read it. From what I've noticed, though, Expanse kind of seems like what I like to call like popcorn science fiction. You know, stuff like The Martian or something of that sort, where it's like it's fun. There are some cool ideas in there, but it's not like the most cerebral science fiction in the world, which is fine if people like them.
I mean, certainly,
it doesn't sound like the
certainly
type
in
that
the television
would, like, appeal to me.
show. Certainly in the television show, I really liked. I mean, apart from the characters, I really liked that it felt very physics oriented.
Yes,
there are explanations for things that exist now and how they are projected into the future. And there's very little hand wavy bullshit, except when it comes to the real magic thing. There's a big thing in the story which is alien and is basically magic. But like,
so
when they're flying their ships, in order to generate gravity in the ship, when they're thrusting, they have gravity towards the thruster.
Which is the whole turn, like they need to turn at the mid of the.
And then they turn at the midpoint and thrust against their inertia, so that they still have gravity. And when that stops, they lose gravity in the ship. And it's like, of course, but no science fiction does that because it's very, very inconvenient. Exactly. That's what I mean, Joe. There's explanations for the human tech. Exactly.
I think
the hard sci-fi part of it is the human understanding of physics and how humans have made technology based on it. The alien stuff is basically magic.
I feel like
I'm thinking. Sorry, Raph. Finish.
No, go on. You go ahead, and then I talk about toxic masculinity for a second.
Of course.
I was gonna say, you're talking about the magic. It makes me think of Clark's third law. That always makes me wonder, what are his first and second laws? I might need to look that up at some point. If someone knows in the comments, let me
you could have been Googling that while you were talking.
I think you're confusing those because there's Clark's law and then there's like Asimov's like three laws of robotics.
Laws of robotics.
You might be confusing those two.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so my point is that I think why Miller is cool and Holden kind of sucks is that Holden is sort of like the attempt of writing a Captain Kirk character in the 21st century without all the incredibly problematic sexism and all the other toxic masculinity that is built into Captain Kirk. And
Captain Kirk was
Miller,
basically, if I can't fuck it, I'll punch it.
yes, and
Yeah.
Miller is very much still toxically masculine, which is, you know, because he's like the noir slash
He's a
hard-boiled.
throwback to a noir
Yes,
detective. Yeah.
which makes him story-wise far more interesting, because he
Yeah.
constantly does dumb shit that is like that reads action, like he leads to actions, whereas Holden usually sort of provokes action by not doing something, and I think that makes it, like, storytelling wise, different. It's like,
Yeah.
would I rather hang out with Holden in real life than Miller? Yes, because he's probably the much nicer guy. But
Yeah.
entertainment does something different than, you know, describing realistic people.
Miller would be a lot more fun to have a beer with. Holden would be a lot more bearable to be on a ship with. You know?
I'd rather have Holden at my back than Miller.
Yeah, and I'd rather have Amos at my back than either of them.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Amos and Naomi, for me, made the show. I thought the two of them were both very, very cool. Yeah, Nico says I like the idea that Belters and Martians became something like subspecies. Yeah, I loved, especially the Belters. I mean, the Martians were basically Earth people on Mars with like a lot of indoctrination, but the Belters actually physically evolved or adapted. You know, they became, because they were in zero G so much, they became, or in low G, they became something physically totally different than Earthers, which was very cool. Avasarala was also made the TV show worth it. Yeah. Avasarala was like a super badass character and also super badass actress. Very, very cool.
I have to agree with the Rogue here. Yes, Ian M. Banks, the culture is
the culture is
yeah.
The culture is hardcore cool. The culture is super, super cool.
I still need to read the culture. I know you guys like
it. The culture is, to me, the culture is doing something. It, like, Banks is thinking about the future and the things that he wanted to deal with in his stories. He took like a huge step beyond almost all science fiction authors.
Yes.
Because everything that most science fiction authors are dealing with, he says all of those problems are solved.
Yeah.
Like in my stories, all of those problems are already solved. I think what's after that?
In that regard, he's like far closer to someone like Ursula Le Guin, who also goes like fuck the tech. We need to talk about like the social thing here.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. Like, the culture is absolutely brilliant in every way, shape, or form.
I found totally by accident, I found a really, really in-depth, really, really interesting and good video on the culture, where he goes through a lot of, there's a fair bit about Banks himself. He interviews one of Banks's closest friends who was also involved in, I think,
is it Damian Walters?
The guy who did the video.
Yeah.
Let me have a quick look because I saved it.
Because I think I saw that, or I didn't watch it because I haven't watched.
Damian Walter. Damian Walter.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
The thumbnail says hippies in space.
I think that's wrong, because it's not necessarily hippies, but I think like the whole like post-scarcity thing is important there. The idea of like, how do we deal with like a post-scarcity society? How do we deal with like basically, you know, fully automated like space of communism?
Yeah, no, I mean, hippies in space as a headline is too simplistic also for his own video, because of course he's not saying
of course
hippies in space. But his point was the sort of myth of the culture and the maybe outside view of the culture is hippies in space.
Yeah,
hippies in space with big guns. He also sort of makes an extension of that in the video.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you know, do what you want, man, and everyone's free to express themselves, and you know, that's
all
like
the way until they're not.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the interesting tension with the culture. Is
that's like all the
on the surface it's meant to be this like super free, you know, nobody has to worry about anything, and then there's a lot of dirt under the surface.
Like every single novel is always about that moment when like those kind of things come up against each other, like the everyone can do whatever they want and so forth. And I really like them. I know Ida doesn't like you read the third one, right? You read Use of Weapons. Yeah, no, I don't. I think like they're just like incredibly well written. I still want to read Ian Banks's like
Other stuff.
other stuff
His
because
non-science fiction.
it's non-science fiction stuff because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there as well.
The
like-
Wasp Factory is good.
The one you really want to prepare for is definitely The Quarry, which is his final novel, which is all about like him and his cancer, like dealing with his cancer diagnosis and treatment and stuff. And yeah, The Quarry being
watching
very much like the image of the body in that regard there.
Right. Digging it out. Yeah. She said read Use of Weapons shortly after finishing Song of Mysteries, which was probably unfair to the book. And also Use of Weapons, I mean, they're not technically exactly in a chronological order, and they're not that connected to each other, except that they all take place in the culture. So you could sort of read almost anything in any order if you felt like it. I think I would always recommend Player of Games for someone to start with, because Consider Phlebas is weird. And Player of Games is a little more straightforward. But I've only read the first, I think, 3. I've read Consider Phlebas, Player of Games, and Use of Weapons.
I feel like Use of Weapons is like, and I talked about that when I made a video about it. Like, I think like the problem with Use of Weapons is that it's one of those books where everyone focuses on this one thing. In this case, it's the structure. The whole like you're having these like 2 narratives going in different temporal directions.
Yeah,
and that kind of like that's like what everyone knows about it, and that kind of makes it very difficult to focus on all the other stuff because we've in our discourse have sort of like picked that one out in the same way that like everyone when they read Thomas Covenant focus on that one event happening in chapter 3 or 4, whenever that is, right? You know, what I mean?
Which is a pity,
like, because the book has a lot more to offer, but we have
absolutely
sort of like pigeonholed the whole thing into this very specific thing, and that makes it very difficult to.
It almost feels to me like Thomas Covenant has been blacklisted. Like I keep thinking I want to reread it, and I will eventually. But it feels like there's so much. I wasn't aware of this until I joined BookTube. But it feels like even or especially maybe amongst people who've never read it, it's that book with the rape in it.
Yes.
You know, that's how people have it on their list. And that's a pity.
I mean, it took me a while to get like get through the first trilogy, and I read it, and I made a video about it like last year, 2 years ago, because beyond anything else, and I have like a lot of like problems with the Thomas Covenant books, because I think they're not that well written, because Stephen R. Donaldson is too American to imitate Tolkien's style. He doesn't get it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like what he does get is very specifically the idea of being chronically ill and being ostracized by society for it, and having to deal with that ostracism, and having to sort of that's something like
what that does to you. And
yes, and that's something where like don't get me wrong, I'm obviously not that ostracized, but I am somewhat outside of society just because I'm blind, right?
Sure.
So I'm like, he gets it very well. It's incredibly depressing and highly frustrating, but that's kind of the point, because being that kind of person can be incredibly depressing or frustrating, because you constantly come up against these like things you can't change,
blockages and
so he does get that, but that doesn't make for like an entertaining kind of read. That's
no. And I mean, it's also a long arc.
Yeah,
like Thomas Covenant, the character, his arc is a really long one, and it starts in a very ugly place, you know, and like the whole book is about him actually, in a way, or the whole 6 books is about him recovering his humanity.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think like it's an incredibly impressive thing to show what you can do with epic fantasy. And when you read his like essays on like epic fantasy being the literature of reintegration, not reconciliation, but reintegration. It makes even more sense, but it helps to see where he succeeds And it also helps to see where he kind of fails for all kinds of dumb reasons. One of those being like his chosen style of prose just not really working that well. Because...
Daniel makes a funny point. Donaldson has pet words that he uses that drive me out of my mind. H.P. Lovecraft would tell him to chill the fuck out on all the instances of eldritch, and surely every vista isn't fecund. I haven't read anything by him in a very long time, so I don't have that top of
I've
my
avoided
mind
Thomas
anymore,
Covenant because I've heard it be described as like edgelordy, Lord of the Rings ripoff, and I'm just like, eh.
That is very much not true. It's not an edgelordy.
Not at all.
It's very much it's you can't fully call it like deconstruction, but it's certainly more of a reply and sort of from Lord of the Rings. It does take Lord of the Rings tropes and themes and so forth, and does
turns them
interesting new
around.
things with it.
Yeah.
It's well worth reading, but it needs a lot of patience because it does not make it easy to read.
Yeah. The writing
Matanga's
is not
being a
always
leper
easy.
sounds pretty interesting. Man, that could be interesting.
Yeah, well, that's what Raph was just talking about, like the being sick, being someone whose primary identity is I am sick, and also being someone that is, because of that sickness, completely ostracized. That really makes it, and it's basically a story not of a reluctant hero, but a completely broken hero. Like he's basically this alternate world superhero when the thing starts.
But because of like his background, he's unable to actually accept that.
Being who he is, he can't actually do what he's meant to be doing or capable of doing. Edgelordy, Thornell. If you want edgelordy, read Empire of the Umpire. Vampire.
It seems kind of Elric-y from how I watched my friend John from Talking Story talk about it. It sounded kind of Elric-y from
how Elric-y at all. There are no vampires in Elric.
No, but I would have said if you want edgelordy, go read like Prince of Thorns.
Also, yeah.
And yes, I fully agree with Joe there. It's good, but it's
interesting, but not enjoyable. Yeah. I think it's him and also Tad Williams. I would say they were both writing at a point where it's like, okay, let's try and redefine this genre so that it's not just doing Tolkien over and over again.
They kind of went into different directions.
They went in different directions. Yeah, I mean, Ted Williams has much more
far more confrontational.
Yeah, and Ted Williams's characters are much more likable. You know, although he in a way they both created a hero who isn't. You know, like Simon in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is too young and stupid.
Simon is annoying, but Simon's not,
he's not a bad guy like Thomas Covenant kind of is at points, but he's kind of useless as a hero. Like to start with, anything heroic he does is almost accidental.
He's fixed without the assassin training.
Exactly.
I do
technically far more realistic.
Yeah,
I do like Michael R. Fletcher. I've only read one of his books, but I can see how people might think he's edgelordy.
Oh my God. The one thing I've read by him, I've talked about it before, put me off of him completely. I was like, dude, if this is the way you want to use the language, and if it felt like a 13-year-old who has just learned like a list of bad words and is trying to shock their parents. I was just like, this is just
I thought
bad.
Beyond Redemption was pretty good.
Bad. I haven't read that one.
My problem is that Michael R. Fletcher calls himself Fletch God Apocalypse on social media, which is a reference to the Italian death metal band Flesh God Apocalypse, which you can find funny, but if that's your reference, man, we got a problem because that band sucks.
Maybe that explains Michael R. Fletcher. I don't know.
I think it might, because Flesh God Apocalypse is a death metal band, a technical death metal band that uses a lot of like classical orchestration to sort of beef up their sound and pretend to be more than they really are by having this like, hey, look, we also do classical stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but it still doesn't add up to like an actual song at the end of the day. And I think that might sort of represent Michael R. Fletcher as well.
Yeah, I really, if I'm having thoughts like this consciously while in the middle of reading a book, it's a bad sign. I was reading some of the passages that he wrote in this book, and just thinking, how old are you? Are you like preteen? It really felt like he was just going out of his way to try and say something that might shock the reader. And it wasn't even, it wasn't even high impact stuff. Like there are bits where Erickson writes very high impact, very emotional, very violent, very disturbing scenes. And they are disturbing because he writes them so well. And I just had the feeling that Fletcher was like a 12, 13-year-old just going, fuck, 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 over and over again, trying to piss off his parents. You know, I was like,
sort of like the thing that like horror had like at
immature.
the end of the 80s when the splatter got so overdone that suddenly we're like, well, this is no longer like actually upping the ante. You're just like adding more gore, and at some point it becomes just scenery.
Yeah,
I'll speak to his defense real quick, but I really liked in Beyond Redemption like how visceral his style is, and just how he makes you feel really uncomfortable with these visceral scenes. And you might say, oh, that's meh, whatever, but I think that takes talent to do. Now, I don't know if I'll read more of his work, but I liked what I saw. I thought it's kind of like a grittier Elric, going back to the Elric theme here. Basically takes that like more cocky and weirdness, but he puts it in like a grittier setting. It's quite fascinating, I thought.
I've heard from a lot of people that they liked Beyond Redemption, and after reading this other thing, which was quite short, and it was co-written with Anna Smith Spark, but it's clear the bits that she wrote and the bits that he wrote. And after reading the bits that he wrote and DNFing the book because of it, I had no interest in reading anything else by him.
The Beyond Redemption thing with the German, I've heard about that. I've heard about that from German speakers, but I haven't read it, so I don't know.
I'd be really curious to know the details of that. Yeah, being two of us German speakers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not German, so I don't have a dog in that fight, but I'm sure something will piss you off in those books.
I wouldn't say piss me off, but it's certainly something that can take you out of like in a way that, you know, I don't want to even call it immersion, but it can take you completely out when you're like, I know what you're trying to say here, but you're getting it wrong. And you could have just like asked someone.
I'm being someone who does speak another language other than English. I every now and then have run into things where someone's using German for some reason, and I'm just like, I speak it as a second language, and I could have told you that was wrong. like
this using one of those, what are those called? I can't think of it at the moment, but a lot of metal fans use it to look more
umlaut.
Umlaut, the heavy metal umlaut, yes.
The dots.
There's
on top
even
of letters.
There's even a tabletop role playing game called Umlaut.
Is there?
I fucking hate Razor Fist.
Umlaut,
a
tabletop role playing game of heavy metal.
Okay.
Done by a German, like a small German press, and I keep forgetting which one it is, but they're the ones that are like somewhere in southern Hessen. They've done some other stuff and like some old school OSR stuff as well. I just keep forgetting who they were.
Did they do Zweihänder?
The title would suggest, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually a game that's originally in English.
Yeah,
but it's called Zweihänder because the Zweihänder as a sword is famous with that name as a badass sword. So, yeah,
could be the same. It sounds like they might be the same people. I just they used to run a like smaller tabletop convention in one of those castles south of Darmstadt, like along the Bergstrasse.
Oh, not Eternal or Tentacles.
But that was like that's on the Moselle, not on the Bergstrasse.
Yeah. I've never been to.
No, it's on the Bergstrasse. It's like near Bensheim, somewhere like one of those castles. There's like way too many castles on those hills.
Ida says she wrote a book set in Germany, didn't do research, just threw a dart at a map. Okay.
That is totally fine.
Maybe. Yeah.
I haven't read it. I can't criticize it for like authenticity.
I can't either, but I assume that the authenticity probably isn't that high if she didn't do any research. But it may also not play into the story in any relevant way at all.
Well, that's kind of the point. Where I feel like using German words to describe like magic powers, which sort of is the thing with like I haven't read Beyond Redemption, but like from what I know, it's like you have the magic is sort of like tied to different mental health conditions, basically, and how you can warp reality through your specific mental health condition. And he uses German words for that kind of stuff. So there is sort of like weight to that you maybe don't want to fuck around with.
Yeah,
because it can certainly turn off people that
I haven't read Beyond Redemption, but I have heard from other people that they were actually not very impressed with his writing of mental health conditions.
I've heard people who like it, and I've heard people who really hate it, and so I reserve judgment. But what I will do is get myself another beer, because
Thornall,
we still have a self-serve bar here, which is bad.
You need to get servants. Thornall is looking for edgelordy stuff and has read Empire of the Umpire and Prince of Thorns. Have you read Elric?
I was about to say, yeah, Elric is like
Elric is the original edgelord. In fact,
the OG.
Elric was an edgelord before the word edgelord was a word. And I think, like, whenever I think edgelord, I think someone who's trying hard. That's not Elric. Like, Elric is okay. Thornall says he has read Elric.
He's very moody and angsty.
He has a lot of good reasons to be.
That's true. Like, his people are a bunch. His people are basically a bunch of murdering sociopaths.
Yeah,
and he's like the only one who has like a conscience of some sort.
But he's also one of two people who has a sword that eats people's souls and drives them to kill people. So yeah,
he's kind of boned. In other words,
kind of, yes. He is a tragic hero. Maybe not even really a hero. So,
have you ever read Epic Pooh, man, from Michael Moorcock?
I have.
What do you think of it?
I think he's a cranky old man, even when he was young, and I understand a lot of his points. I mean, like, there's no denying that Tolkien was a big Christianity fan, and Tolkien was a big monarchy fan. And if you're not a big Christianity or monarchy fan, then some of the stuff in Tolkien is kind of like, really? Will having a king solve all our problems? Does that make the world better? And that's totally understandable.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like when I read Epic Pooh, I respect it a lot, but I find a lot of his gripes, once you kind of peel back attempts of his explaining himself, a lot of it is just him complaining about stuff that he just doesn't like, and
he was an anti-monarchist and an atheist, right? So, like, you put him together with an author who is Catholic and a monarchist, and of course they're going to have things that they don't agree about. I don't know. I think in a way, I've always had a bit of a feeling with Michael Moorcock, and I mean, he's still alive and he still bitches about things online. You can find him on Facebook, and he whines about all sorts of things. To me, a lot of it, I feel almost a little sorry for Michael Moorcock, because I think part of what pissed him off about Tolkien was successful. Tolkien was so much more successful than anything Michael Moorcock ever wrote. Like, he wrote a lot of books, most of which no one's ever heard of. And if they've heard of Michael Moorcock, it's because of Elric, and there's a good chance they haven't read it. And everybody's heard of Lord of the Rings, and it's the most sold fantasy book ever, and so on and so forth. So I think some of it,
Elric adaptation, though. I mean, an animated one, I'd watch it.
Yeah. And in fact, if I was Michael Moorcock, I'd be really pissed off about all of the Elric adaptations that aren't actually Elric adaptations.
Yeah,
like The Witcher TV show and Daemon Targaryen in House of the Dragon and so on and so forth. They're all Elric.
No, but he's not really that angsty though. Well, I guess he is.
Daemon Targaryen is totally angsty, and he is in the first season of House of the Dragon. He is wearing Elric's armor, like exactly as described in the books by Michael Moorcock.
I have to point out that the rogue mentioned the steel remains as edgelordy in a good way. And the rogue is right. It is somewhat edgelordy, and it is absolutely brilliant. And I wish more people would have read it or would read it, even though Richard K. Morgan has become a bit of a turf, which I don't like, but those books are so fucking good. And they are edgy. They're edgy and they're angry, and they make there's a brilliant review that Joe Abercrombie wrote for the first one. And like Richard K. Morgan's the guy who wrote Altered Carbon, which I think more people know. Right. And The Steel Remains is his like epic fantasy trilogy. And Joe Abercrombie wrote like a sort of like back cover blurb review kind of thing for it, and it's a thing of glory. It's like we have those parts like Richard K. Morgan takes the tropes of fantasy, chops them up, and sets fire to them, and then pisses on them.
How come no one made jokes about Dick and Moorcock? So Philip K. Dick and Michael Moorcock are sitting in a bar. No, I don't have a.
No, I mean,
I don't have a Dick and Moorcock.
That's probably why
joke.
Moorcock was angry because of his last name. And
because his name sucks. Yeah.
Here's a funny thing.
It's better than Lescock.
That's true. Here's a funny thing, though, with Moorcock. I used to be very active on the Ironcron Entertainment Rollmaster and Middle-earth role-playing game web forums. Right. And they had, like, like a policy against using slurs and swears and whatnot. And that included the word cock. So every time you talked about Elric, it changed Moorcock into Moor Rooster. It's like every time I see, like, I read Elric or anything else connected to that his work somewhere.
Michael Moor Rooster.
It's Michael Moor Rooster in my head. And I'm like,
I think Jeroen's right. If Michael R. Fletcher was here, he would make a Dick and Moorcock joke. Yeah, probably.
I do like Philip K. Dick, though. I actually read Ubik this year. It was pretty good.
How do you like Ubik?
Oh, I thought it was good. It's a good book. It's kind of weird. It's like a spy story, but it's also like a weird science fiction, and gets real. It's Philip K. Dick, so he's a special, unique brand.
I just yesterday or the day before watched Moyd's video about Philip K. Dick, and many of his books. He doesn't go through all of the books, but he gives a very good sort of life story of Philip K. Dick.
I watched that video. It was okay.
Yeah, and a bit of an overview of the
target audience, though. That's the problem there. It's like because I've not read all of Philip K. Dick's work, but I've read, like recently read High Weirdness for my research on conspiracy stuff, which also includes a lot of stuff on Philip K. Dick. So I already knew more on like the more psychedelic side of his life than came up in that book, in that video, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm no longer
about conspiracies. How have you not read more Philip K. Dick, dude? That was like his bread and butter.
I've read a lot of Philip K. Dick. I've just not read all of his because that man has written a lot of stuff.
That's true. He did write a lot.
And the conspiracy part that I'm looking into is more about Robert Anton Wilson and not so much about Philip K. Dick. It's just that Philip K. Dick is sort of like incidental to that. But I've read Ubik before. I love it. I think it's a really good book.
I found Moyd's video mostly really interesting because I've heard a lot about Philip K. Dick's books over the years, but I didn't know much about the man. And he goes through a lot of like his life and his marriages and his drug use and his eventual death and all of that. Brian is asking, does Moyd have a team? He has a guy who shoots for him. I've seen that. Yeah. And I kind of assume at this point that he has a cutter.
So who is Moyd? I don't think I've heard of him.
It's a media death cult.
Media death cult.
Oh. All right.
British guy, quite funny. Does pretty epic, sort of large, in-depth, detailed videos.
Yeah.
I would bet. I mean, like I said, I know I've seen in his videos he's actually shown that there's a guy who does the shooting, so he's
Yeah.
got a cameraman, and I would be very surprised if he's doing all of his own cutting.
No, I think
anymore.
he's got credits in like the description where he talks about like there is
Yeah.
like at least like another person that helps him editing and shit like
Yeah, yeah.
The interesting thing that I feel is like that he sadly left out of his video is that Philip K. Dick, after starting to study, he like shared rooms with a bunch of like experimental poets in the 1940s and 50s that went on and did like more like like surrealist poetry and stuff in the 40s and 50s. And those were the people that kind of got him into, say, the I Ching and certain parts of like Chinese religion and stuff like that. On the one hand, but also into like the practices of like how to write stuff. Like there were, the people that did like the same thing that like surrealists and Dada did, like cutting up stuff and just like and I feel that's an important part to understand where Philip K. Dick's art comes from, is that he spent like after like going to high school to college, basically being roommates and broke roommates with a bunch of experimental poets and stuff. And I think that's an important essence that like element that kind of Lloyd left out, which kind of makes it difficult to understand like Philip K. Dick the artist, because there has been like a level of like, especially with like his early books, you can see him trying to become like much closer to like a beat artist, like much closer to people like Ginsberg and that crowd, and then moving into different realms from there. And I think that's sort of like one of those parts that are important about Philip K. Dick as a writer.
Yeah.
But
Lloyd has apparently said that he storyboards his videos extensively, which I can totally see, because I mean he's not just standing in front of the camera talking. He definitely has. He has a script. He has a very clear plan. He's worked a story up before he's started shooting anything, and he's doing it quite professionally.
Yeah, he's got the ability to read off a teleprompter, which is something I don't have.
Yeah, well, unless you actually have a teleprompter, I don't. I can't do that either. I mean, I could, but I'd be looking off the camera all the time.
Yeah, but like the idea of like having notes and stuff that you can actually read off is something that I just generally don't have, and sometimes I wish I had, because it leaves me with that issue where I'm like, I want to make like a very specific, like almost
structured
structured argument.
Yeah,
and even though I hit all the points of that argument just by ad-libbing it comes across as less authoritative or like authoritative than it would be if I would like read like a pre-written statement, because writing down text feels different from like just like talking. That's something I will never be able to reach unless I write out stuff and then learn it by heart, which I'm too lazy to do.
He also recently did a Malazan video. He started reading Malazan. He did a video about.
I saw that. I haven't watched it yet, because
it's actually pretty good. I mean, you can't see thumbnails, so you wouldn't have seen that he changed the thumbnail. But the original thumbnail that he had was awesome. It was him with like doing the horns with his hand and screaming, wearing a stuffed Viking hat with horns, and it said in huge letters "fuck fantasy," but it was like F symbol K fantasy. And was just a hilarious. And I mean, as soon as I saw that, I was like, I have to click on that and see what he's talking about. But he changed it to something else.
I think like what Moid has got, and that like most of us on BookTube have not, is that he takes advantage of like the medium of YouTube, of video, in a way that most of us being just like talking heads don't.
Yeah.
And
I know. There's a very clear point though. I used to watch him like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he was basically a talking head as well. Like he sat in his chair and he had his bookshelf behind him, and it was basically the same as most other people. And the big difference was his personality. And at some point he made a turn where he was like, okay, I'm going to produce fewer videos, but more serious videos, more in-depth and longer and scripted and locations. And now he's going all over England to like the whole Malazan video is set in a in a ruined castle, you know, and he's walking around different shots in the castle and talking about different aspects of the book and whatever. So, you know, he's definitely upped his game in the last year and a half.
I, that's like one of those things I really respect about Moid, because it's one of those things that like always annoys me about BookTube is like how much we as a larger community don't actually innovate at all. And just like get stuck with it, which is fine. You know, it makes it super accessible. Like everyone who has a phone can start BookTube, which is really cool. Which is really cool. But like the idea that we don't go anywhere. We don't try anything new, like most of us at least don't try anything new. And that's something that I'm sometimes bothered about, because like this will leave us sort of like in the dust, in like this very small community that will never grow anywhere, never go anywhere. And it's like we could do so much
mostly more. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't call anything Moid's doing innovative. It's like been in television since the 70s. But it's new to the question. The question to me isn't like, are we being innovative or not? I think it's much more, how much effort do we want to put into things?
Yeah, and then definitely like
he very clearly made a very conscious decision to put a lot more effort into his videos, and they're extensively scripted, and he's using multiple locations, and he's using B-roll, and he's shooting outdoors and all sorts of things. And but all of the vocabulary that he's using is the vocabulary of film and television. Like it's been there forever.
But like, I mean,
he's just bothering to do it.
He started using it once he could afford to use it, with, you know, his channel having the right size and everything, which once again I totally get. But like, there are things that like the larger YouTube sphere already does when it comes to the vocabulary of YouTube that we in BookTube don't necessarily go to. And I'm like, sometimes I'm wondering like which parts of that, you know, larger YouTube vocabulary could we adopt and make our own and use to benefit. And I'm not sure if we've figured that one out yet. I just wish we would be more experimental in that regard sometimes.
Yeah. I am Terry took the words out of my mouth. I'm sitting here. It's very hot in Berlin right now. I'm sweating my ass off, and that is making me pretty exhausted. I think I'm going to call it for the evening. An hour and a half, somewhat shorter pub than usual.
What do you want to say?
I almost showed up without a shirt, and then I realized that it's a pub and not a beach bar.
Yes.
I was going to answer Ida. I am on vacation. That is why you do not see that. I am in a different location.
Britain is at the lake.
Yep.
Wherever that is. But
a place called Texoma. It's on the border between Oklahoma and Texas.
Okay. That's a super original name for a place that's on the border of Texas and Oklahoma.
I started my day this morning with a phone call with a friend from Texas, so
okay. All right, everybody. I am going to call it. Thank you both for joining me, not leaving me alone on screen. Thank you for all of the pub regulars and maybe pub irregulars who are lurking. If you're lurking, just say hi in the chat. I'm always really curious because I see the number of people who are here, and that does not in any way represent the number of people who are commenting actively in the chat. So there's always silent lurkers sitting in the chat, and I'm always curious who they are. Before we go, though, again, I'll say it. Next week, no pub, because I will be out of town. I will post that in relevant places as well. So don't be sitting around waiting for it. But the week after that should be pub as usual. So I'll see you all then.
Also, tell me what to read next, because I'm running out of books and Audible credits, because I need to spend my Audible credit for Blackheart Man, which only comes out like in 2 weeks, but I have to read it.
All right. Have a lovely week, or actually 2 weeks, everybody. Good start to the week tomorrow, and see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. See you around.